Sorry about that. My bad. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm super excited to be here with you today. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the Blended Pledge. And I am so excited to be collaborating once again with the team at Graphite Connect. So it's nice to see you again, Conrad. Welcome to the show. All right, so this is the second time in a month, so I'm really excited to keep this momentum going and continue the conversation. So for anyone that missed Graphite's recent appearance on Let's Talk Supply Chain, go and check out episode 492 after today's session. We're going to put the link in the comments so that you can head over there and learn more about the topic that we're talking about today, more about Conrad, more about Graphite Connect. So today we're talking vendor onboarding. It's something every business, big or small, has to go through. And there's one thing it has in common for all of them. It's a massive pain point. And I talk about this on the show all the time. Onboarding can be incredibly slow, manual, inaccurate. It can lose you business and cost you your competitive edge. But how can you tackle it? And why should more effective onboarding be a strategic priority in a climate filled with competing priorities? Well, we're going to be shining a light on that today. Conrad and I will be exploring how traditional processes are eating up weeks or months of cycle time and how leading teams are cutting that down to days. We'll be talking about why faster supplier onboarding isn't just a nice to have and what a shared supply chain network or supplier network unlocks that orchestration tool and email chains never will. And we'll be sharing exactly how you can improve supplier onboarding without sacrificing quality data. Now, remember to let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. Send us questions through the comments on LinkedIn and YouTube. Plus, if you're loving the conversation, we want to see some fire emojis. Conrad, you know I like a good fire emoji. So, we're going to see quite a few today, I'm pretty sure. All right. So welcome to the show, Conrad. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's really good to be with you again.
Yes, your episode went live this week on the Let's Talk Supply Chain podcast. You and I had a lot of fun with that one. We're actually getting some amazing feedback from that particular episode, and we're going to continue some of that today. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you introduce yourself, your background, and give us an overview of Graphite Connect, like who you are, what you do, and how you help your customers?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. I'm the CEO founder over here at Graphite. I started my procurement career in the 90s. I know for many people in procurement, that was before they were born. So I have someone on my team, and he loves to emphasize that. To put that in context a little bit more, like procurement in my early days was on paper, like white, pink, yellow, triplicate requisitions. It's hard to believe that we've gone from there to where we're at today. At the same time, it doesn't feel like a ton has changed. But
Right.
That was at Intel. They were hugely, they're one of the best supply chain and procurement organizations on the planet, really organized, really professional. I just loved learning procurement with that team. I went from there through an acquisition to Adobe. I was the head of procurement over at Adobe for almost 10 years.
Nice.
Led them from sort of low process maturity through a transformation to get up to much higher process maturity. Loved that. Loved my team. It was an incredible experience. But during that time, I lived through this, and many of you may have experienced this in the last 10 or 15 years. The transition from supplier onboarding was easy to supplier onboarding is incredibly
complex,
complicated. Everyone's frustrated. Nobody likes it. It just turned into what I call, the hairball or the big train wreck in procurement. And so, that set me on a course to try and figure out with a bunch of peers in the Bay Area, how can we do this better? We can talk more about what that, those conversations, but that launched me into building Graphite, which we're just so focused on making supplier management work better. And of course, onboarding is one of the early steps in building that relationship with suppliers, getting the data, managing, mitigating risk, background checks, all that kind of stuff. So what we're all about at Graphite.
Well, and it's on my to-do list because we were talking about this earlier when we recorded that podcast. I need to take a look at it even for my business as well. So I'm super excited about it and I can't wait for everybody else to hear about it as well. One of the things that I always remember about your brand, especially when I've been to conferences with you, is that you do the race. Is it a racing simulator?
Yes, yes. F1, it's an F1 race simulator. We put that in a suitcase. It's been all over the world, from Singapore to London to
suitcase.
It was in Vienna last week. So yeah, we take it everywhere.
What is the significance of that with your brand and what you're doing in procurement?
So, little story for any of you that are familiar with Pinewood Derbies, little boys, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, you make these little, carve up this little pine car and put wheels on it, to make it go faster, you put graphite on the axles, like between the plastic wheel and the axle, and it makes it go faster. Like most people, I think, probably don't realize it, but graphite is a lubricant. I mean, it's this really slippery powder that makes the car go faster. So that's the origin of our name. And so it's really fun that this racing concept has kind of continued in our marketing and our messaging. A lot of you may be familiar with F1 through Netflix Drive to Survive. That is really what turned me on to this sport, because I used to watch it on Sunday, and these cars, they all look the same. They're going around the track. Like, how interesting is this, And then Netflix, they explained the sport. They introduced all the personalities. But one of the things that they do in that show is they show the pit stops. The car comes into the pit stop, and these F1 cars come in and out of the pit stop in sometimes less than 2 seconds. I mean, you just think about that. In 1950, the pit stop was like a couple of minutes. I think it's 3 minutes was the equivalent. And now they're changing 4 tires in less than 2 seconds. And there's so many, like when I was in school, I was just fascinated with this kind of massive transformation from 3 minutes to, that would be insane for someone to say, hey, Sarah, what takes you 5 or 10 minutes today? You should be able to do in 2 seconds or 1 minute.
And you're like, absolutely not. That's not possible.
It's just like impossible, right? But the idea is you have to do things differently to have that kind of a transformation. I mean, I could show you videos about what did the 1950s pit stop look like. But the thing I love most about this idea is the pit stop has a huge impact on the race. Just a couple of weeks ago, the 2 leaders in the world championship came into the pit stop one after the other. They're both on the McLaren team. One of them got a 2 seconds pit stop, and the other one got a 6-second pit stop. And the guy with the 6-second pit stop was actually winning before that. And it completely changed the course of the race with just 4 seconds. I think in procurement, we get too hung up on what we do inside our own offices. Like that's what's important. And I think we need to think more about what we do. Like, we are enabling the racer, the driver, the businesses that we support to win. And how we do our jobs, both in terms of the amount of time, the complexity, and quality, can be the difference of whether they win or not. That's an absolute game changer. And I think we lose track of that, right? We're not just here to collect cost savings and move paper around and sign contracts. We're here to make the business successful. And if we don't, within procurement, if you don't look at what you're doing and go, yep, that's why I'm here, then you probably should go find another job, right? Why would the business even pay for the cost of procurement if procurement isn't making the business more successful?
Right.
As we focus on that, I think it really changes things. But anyway, there's just so much cool layers of this symbol, and the method, the metaphor behind the pit stop. But yeah, we love it. We love to have fun at the conferences. And any of you that are coming out to DPW next week, sadly, we won't have the simulator there. But we will in our race jerseys. We'll be easy to find, and we'll have a good time anyway.
Well, and I appreciate you for sharing that story. I mean, it's one of the things that I've always noticed about your brand is that you bring the fun to procurement. But also, I think that story is really important to the story that we're going to be talking about today, around cutting onboarding times. So giving procurement the speed advantage. And that's what we're all about today. That's what you're all about. It's what we want to talk about. And I think a lot of professionals, senior leaders, even the C-suite wants to learn, how do we do this? How do we make our teams and our onboarding more efficient? So let's start by talking about procurement itself, because it's really the why behind this whole conversation today. So generally speaking, what do you think the macro landscape we find ourselves in right now, how is that impacting business? I mean, I just came back from inland, things like economic uncertainty, geopolitical issues are putting cost management high up on that priority list. And we actually did a poll a couple of weeks ago around this as well. around cost management. And we've been talking a lot about cost to serve as well. So what are you seeing from your perspective? What's impacting business? What's the landscape right now? How's everybody feeling?
You know, it feels a little wild, right? In 5 years, we've lived through this giant pandemic, and now we've got all of this political and tariff uncertainty. You know, it's almost like we're running from one firefight to another firefight, and so much focus of the organization. I don't know about you, but pre-COVID, or sorry, pre-pandemic, I would go to Thanksgiving dinner or family dinners and try and explain what I'm doing. And nobody even, like, supply chain, procurement, what is this stuff? Like, I actually had some young men in the office last night doing like a career night, and it takes like 15, 20 minutes to explain this to people. But after the pandemic, everyone knows supply chain, and supply chain matters, right? It really elevated the understanding. It elevated the opportunity to impact and add value to the organization. But you know, I'd also, you know, like, flip back in time. I mean, I've been around long enough that I lived through the dot-com bubble, which was this economic, like, crazy crisis and technology shattering thing. You know, a few years later, it was the Great Recession. You know, like, all sorts of panic. I had friends that lost their homes. I mean, there was all these big things. And so I want to keep in perspective that it's common that these things happen.
Cyclical.
Yes, it's cyclical. And the organization is going to think, oh, it's all, you know, I need cost savings. I need it. It feels like it's accelerating to me. And I think, you know, post-pandemic and post-tariffs, I think we now have which is a little different. We have this AI thing, which is creating this giant uncertainty about what's going to happen in the business. I think organizations are sort of unsure about where to put their investments. Are they going to give you more people on your team, even though you need it? They're going to be like, well, just use AI. Like, there's all of these pressures back onto procurement, and they're going to come in different flavors. A pandemic is quite different than tariffs. But underneath all of that, I think there is this agility that we need in procurement. Like, when the phone rings and the CFO is like, "Hey, you're up to bat. It's time. We need you." It's not the time to be trying to figure out how are you going to respond to the next difficult thing that comes up. And I think, I think this is part of what we need to figure out in procurement. Like, we don't know what that next thing is going to be. It could be another pandemic. It could be, God forbid, there's wars going on. Like, I don't know. There's just so much potential uncertainty. Regardless of what that next thing is, it will come. Like, in the next 5 years, something is going to come, and it's going to shake the foundation of the organization, and procurement's going to need to step up. And we can do that. We can do it. Get prepared.
I want to share a story, because I was just recently in Chicago, and I went to Primark. And the cashier behind the counter, you were talking about how people, have learned about procurement and supply chain. And the lady had said things like the prices have gone up. And the cashier was like, yeah, it's tariffs. All the prices are going up because of tariffs. And I'm like, here we go again. We're going to get blamed as procurement and supply chain professionals. But you're right. People are talking about it more. They're more aware of it. They're going to be looking for procurement teams and supply chain teams to do a little bit more, get ahead of things, understand what's happening in the market, and ask the right questions to be proactive rather than reactive, which is, traditionally sometimes a little bit of where we've been, purely because of some of the circumstances that have popped up and the speed at which we need to move. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about why procurement is so important today. With everything going on, why is procurement so important?
Well, I think it's always been important, I guess. If you think of an organization, the fuel that kind of goes into the engine, a big part of that fuel is supplier resources, right? The product, the services, the innovation. The suppliers are a huge lever to our organization's success. Some more than others, right? Some people outsource huge chunks of their organization. Some people do or don't tap into the suppliers for innovation. But the supplier side of the business is hugely important. It's
Well, and
like
sometimes it's like a few tiers deep. Like I was having conversations with some really large enterprise names, that household names that people would know. And sometimes that supplier management is tiers deep. And within suppliers, there's so many things that you have to consider, from sustainability, right? From, anti-slavery and forced labor. Like there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to manage as procurement teams, and we've got to be getting it right.
Yeah. I think a lot about what's happened in procurement, let's say, so indirect procurement versus supply chain. Cause I often think about like Henry Ford's factory. Like the first time this factory got put together and they were trying to build a car, and all of a sudden they were out of steering wheels or out of tires or wheels or something.
Right.
Like, hey, wait a minute, Sarah, it was your job to have tires here. What's your problem? So I don't think this idea of supply chain risk and resilience is new. I think that from the very first moment of building a factory, someone was like, hey, we can't do our job because that thing's not here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really matured. It's changed, of course, right? Like all of the suppliers around the factory were probably across the street, and now our suppliers are all over the world. And that's it's really got more complex, as well as, the cars of whatever it was, 1900s, are not the cars of today, right? Like if you think about Tesla and the computers and like the AI and like everything that's being built is so much more sophisticated than it was back then. But on the indirect side, as recent as the 90s when I started, there wasn't a whole lot of background check and due diligence going into these suppliers. Mm-hmm. And then with cyber breaches and GDPR and other privacy laws going on around the world, you talked about modern slavery. I think on the indirect side, there's this the pandemic, post-pandemic, everyone I talk to wants to do financial viability checks on all of their suppliers. Right. Which, by the way, I think is a bad idea. We can talk about that separate. But it's like, I think on the indirect side of procurement, we're in this early stage of trying to figure out, how do we do risk? How do we do background checks and due diligence? What matters in this space? And there's, some organizations have really figured it out, but I think a lot of them are still in this semi-panic mode. Like, I don't know, we better do everything, because if anything goes wrong, we look really stupid. But those suppliers are important. And if there's a disruption, then it comes right back to the business. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're here to enable the business to be successful. Mm-hmm. And we are, in many cases, the people, the resources, the team that's understanding the supplier and, helping contribute to those supplier decisions. Well,
and making it all work, right? But I think sometimes companies see procurement as a cost center. But I really think, and I, you've said this before, and I agree with you. I think some other people in the industry have said it before. Procurement done well, done right, and given the tools and the resources to be able to do that, can be a real competitive advantage. Talk to me about that. How can you utilize procurement, make sure that they're well supported in tools and resources for them to be a real competitive advantage for their organization?
Well, I simplify everything back to this. We're here to enable the business to be successful. And what that looks like in process and technology and people is going to be different from organization to organization based on the organization's maturity and what they're trying to accomplish. But, I just think we've got to keep that in perspective, and what that means. We got some organizations we're working with right now that are like working on products that have to go through clinical trials. And the cost of running a clinical trial for another month is insanely high.
Wow.
Particularly when you say, okay, the cost of doing all of this clinical trial work is this, and we're not selling product yet. So the revenue coming in on all of this expense, like we're separating it, there's a huge impact to the top line of how the business works based on how long does it take for us to do this process with our suppliers. So, on the edges of this, there is absolute and direct connection to the revenue. As you move to the other side, I mean, you can talk about things like, I don't know. I've seen over the last 30 years, we've created a bunch of self-service like strategies. Like there used to be in the travel team, there used to be somebody that would book your airline and your hotel for you, and now you do it yourself. There used to be more people to help you do your purchase requisition, your purchase order. Now you do it yourself. So there's just so much more of this do it yourself, but many of this yourself person are high paid engineers, high paid marketing, like these are professionals that were not hired to do procurement. And so the impact to the organization, whether it's wasted time or just, I don't know, I talked to one organization, we're talking about how discouraging it is for their engineers to spend time chasing down suppliers to go through the onboarding and the risk and due diligence process.
Right. And we go through it in a completely different way because we've got to run people down to fill out forms or like book things and things like that. And so it happens in every business. And I think we really have to come back to that, is that it's not just a procurement and a supply chain problem. Procurement really does work. It has to be the cog in the wheel for every organization and make sure that we use it as a competitive advantage. Because like I said before, if it's being done well, it can really push you so far ahead of the competition as an organization and position you to be able to be resilient in times like this as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, from a pandemic and tariff and all this uncertainty perspective, it's just absolutely critical that you're able to respond to that, 2 a.m. phone call from the CFO, right? Like the data is available. So the ability to support the organization at a high level and the ability to enable and support the users, whether they're suppliers or whether they're engineers or basic requesters or whatnot, it really matters. I mean, you've been through these onboarding processes, I'm sure, and through the process.
I have.
I know that there's been times, and I'm just guessing, I don't think you've told me specific stories where you're like, why am I even working with this company? Like, this is not worth the juice. Isn't, what do they say? The juice isn't worth the squeeze or something. Like this is.
It's very true. I have definitely been through it. And I can say, as a small business and a small business owner, it can take some time, money, energy, and resources to get it done. And so I definitely think that this is such a big topic. And the reason why I wanted to say across organizations is that this is something for small, medium-sized enterprise companies that I'm so glad that we're talking about. Now, I want to give a shout out because we already have 4 fire emojis today. So if you're liking this conversation, make sure to give us some more fire emojis. I want to give a shout out to Hugo over on my personal LinkedIn. We see you coming in from Mexico. So thank you so much for joining us. All right, let's get to the topic at hand because we want to talk about onboarding. We want to talk about onboarding suppliers. I kind of gave a bit of a sneak peek as to what that looks like for me as a small business and how much I've been thinking about, working with Graphite. But now I want to do it for everybody else. So can you talk us through what a typical vendor onboarding looks like in traditional systems? Like, how long does it take? How many stakeholders are involved? What does that look like? I mean, I know from my perspective, it's only me. And, I'm reading through these things and I'm like, okay, and that's not good. And then I've got to go back to them and it's back and forth. So in a traditional way, what does that look like?
So Hackett has some research on this, and they say that 50% of all organizations do this with email. So I'm sure you've experienced that, where you go to an organization, they send you a spreadsheet or they send you a PDF, and you got to go do something with that. There's, of course, a mix of Oracle and SAP and Coupa and Ariba, like all of the ERP and S2P, applications that you're familiar with. But all of that is this one-to-one collection of information. Mm-hmm. I told you I started my career on a fax machine. Like it was auto PO.
So did I.
It was auto fax POs. It was auto fax invoices. Like that's how the world worked, right?
Yeah.
That's one-to-one. And the reality is, whether it's an email, which is almost like a fax machine, by the way. I mean, we get really excited about it, but it's just like, hey, I've got something for you. And now it's, instead of being paper on your tray, it's like in this electronic, inbox of yours.
Right.
These portals, whether they're the source to pay or ERPs, again, it's just another inbox, just another tray that you're going to and filling out a bunch of questions. I think most people, and forgive me, I'm going to pick on Coupa just a little bit here. I really actually think they have an amazing product, but people don't understand this. If you're a supplier and you're working with 100 customers that use Coupa, and you need to upload your certificate of insurance for them, you actually upload it 100 times.
So that's part of my question for you as well, because as a small business, I'm going through this on a regular basis, and sometimes it's us being a supplier to the client. And I know how difficult that can be, and everybody has different questions that they're asking. Some are the same questions, and so I feel like I'm going through this almost every 2 weeks for the same information. And it's kind of like, how do we bring that all together and just make it a little bit easier? And I'm not uploading, and nobody wants to upload and download. And plus, I also think about the security of it all. Like, how is this secure where the information is sort of like floating back and forth on email, or having to do the same information, upload the same information a couple of times? There's got to be a security component to this too.
When I was at Adobe, we were collecting supplier information on a PDF through email, like very typical.
Right.
And the IT team would do their audit and they'd be like, wait a minute, this is sensitive information. Sometimes there's a social security number on there, and this is moving around in email. Like, this is unacceptable. It violates all of our stuff. And I'm like, well, don't assign that audit finding to me. Like, what technology do you want me to use that's going to encrypt this in a meaningful way and protect the data? Mm-hmm. But they didn't have answers. I mean, ultimately, we implemented some technology that was okay, but not great. Yeah. I think if we got, me and you and 3 other really smart people in a room and said, how would we design a future that solves all the kind of problems that you're describing, we would arrive probably pretty close to the same place that, me and my friends that were trying to solve this problem. Like, I was, at the time, I was part of the Bay Area Procurement Council. So the CPOs across the Bay Area that, we get together every month or two and we talk about these problems. And at a certain point, we're like, well, wait a minute, like, why do you and I both have to look at Microsoft's W9? Can we just do that together? Like, let's do it like in cooperation. Let's share the pain and let's share the data. Mm-hmm. And everybody loved the idea. Like, and this idea of shared data, I mean, if you go back to the F1 thing, right? Like, the guys that are now, the teams that are changing the tires in the pit stop, all of the resources required. That's the key. Everything you need to do that in 2 seconds has to be right there, ready to go. And in our business, the resources that have to be right there, ready to go, it's data. If you have the data, if you have Sarah's data when you're ready to upload, onboard Sarah, it's like, it's at your fingertips. This shouldn't be like a month or 2 process. It's like, oh, it's there. Everything I need to know about her is there. And the closest corollary to this, think about, I don't know if you're old enough, you look way too young, but to have like created a resume and printed it out and put it in an envelope and sent it.
I did that. I did that. And I went door to door. I mean, let's just be real.
So pre-LinkedIn, what we were all chasing around with resumes, right? And then LinkedIn comes in, and there is now a profile of Sarah on LinkedIn with all of your experiences, your likes, your education. It's essentially an electronic resume. And every year people are searching, like, you're showing up in hundreds of millions of searches of people that are looking for people just like you. Mm-hmm. Right. And when they pull up your profile, they can see, oh, that's where she went to school and that's where she worked. And like within minutes, they can evaluate whether they want to have a deeper business relationship with you, maybe hire you, maybe do any of those kinds of things. That's exactly what we do at Graphite, right? And that's the answer you're looking for, which instead of uploading that certificate of insurance 100 times, that certificate of insurance needs to be sitting in my profile. And everyone that wants to do business with me, then after I give them permission, has access to my profile. Right. Like, that's the big breakthrough.
And why do you think that it's so misunderstood right now, especially onboarding, right? I think there is an important aspect to this, like you were talking about: time, money, energy, resources, which nobody has enough of. But I think this thing about onboarding just gets, and the importance of it, and the importance of the timeliness, as well as it being, fast enough for us to keep up. Why do you think it's misunderstood? And why do you think that it's no longer just a nice to have? I mean, I know from my experience, with technology and how everything's changing and things like that, but also with my business, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. So talk to me about why the importance is misunderstood, but why it's also not no longer nice, just a nice to have.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience, right? When I told you I kind of lived from this, it was easy to, it was hard transformation.
Mhm.
And when it got hard and all of a sudden IT needed to approve the supplier and legal needed to approve the supplier, which wasn't happening when I started my job at Adobe. This was like
Right.
implement a new thing and now it's waiting for them. Then my business stakeholder in marketing is like, okay, we got to get this agency in here. Where are you with this part of the process? And I'm thinking, this is not my, like, what do you mean my process? This is IT's process. This is IT and legal and these other organizations. Those are the roadblocks that are here. And so I think for me personally, there was a bit of a, get out of denial and start taking leadership ownership for what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Because like that level of risk management 15 years ago was not part of the responsibility of procurement.
Yeah.
It was, and now it is. And so it's like, okay, well, step number one is recognize that this stuff needs to happen and that there's nobody else in the organization better positioned to be the leader of this than you are as the leader in procurement. You need to wrap your arms around it. As smelly as it is, you need to love it because you need to make it work better. And without an owner that makes it work better, it just like festers along and there's finger pointing and,
Nobody wants any of that. And essentially time is money. So I think that when you're talking about this and you're taking it back to the C-suite, that's where you got to start, right? Time is money. We're spending a lot of time on this. How do we make it simple and easy? Yeah. And that's why it's no longer just a nice to have. I know for me, I need all that time back. And I could only imagine for leaders in this space, how much time that could give back to them as well. And you're right. We didn't need to get all of that. And I know for my business, like we've got release dates and we've got like due dates and things like that have to happen. Otherwise that date goes by and it's no longer available to us. And the longer this kind of process can take for onboarding, really slows that down and actually diminishes opportunities and diminishes, particular timing that we need to roll a few things out. So it could actually, and I think I said this at the beginning, it could be lost opportunity as well.
100%. A lot of the organizations that I talk to are, because they're in this early process maturity of optimizing it. If they're onboarding Sarah or a speaker or some sophisticated software or marketing agency, there's like a process that it has to go through. And you're going to get presented with a questionnaire and you're going to read it and you're like, what are you talking about? I don't have access to your employee data, or like, what is this thing? I don't like, it doesn't apply to me. And that slows you down. And it takes what, like the common smart person in the organization that wants to get you into the business knows that this should be like a 24 or 48 hour process. And they're okay with that, right? Like that's all that like Sarah is low risk. This, like, let's get her banking, let's get her tax, let's get her paid, right?
Right.
Now, but if you were a super sophisticated AI agency that had access to all my customer data and all my employee data, like, no, that shouldn't be a 48-hour process. Like, right. I need 3 committees to look at what you're really doing and how you're protecting my data. And organizations aren't making that differentiation. And right. But now I'm putting Sarah through the 3 committees and the 3 weeks. And my business stakeholder is looking at that going, you guys are stupid. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you doing? We all know this should be a 24-hour process and you're turning it into a 3-week process. Right. And when that happens, procurement's credibility goes, from here all the way to, you guys are just dumb. Like, you don't understand that we're trying to win a race here. You're showing me this ridiculous pit stop experience. I'm sitting in the car fuming right. Because, like you said, real business things have to happen and I'm waiting for you to do something silly. I think that's at the crux of most of this is onboarding is now so sophisticated in terms of its regulatory requirements, its like reputation risk, all of these kind of things. It needs to be designed in a very appropriate way to the situation so that I can onboard Sarah in 24 hours, but I can recognize that AI agency actually needs a significant amount of background check and due diligence and treat it accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Now, I want to talk about whether there's any risks associated with speeding up the onboarding process. I think we kind of covered most of it in what you just said, though. And I like the fact that you're saying, like, let's not lump all of the vendors, all of the suppliers together in one, because they're not all the same. And if you do that, you can really speed up the process on ones that really don't need all of that background information, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to look at it from different lenses. But I think what's critical to that and what could potentially help de-risk it is also the data, right? Having good data. You mentioned data a little bit earlier. And I think that is kind of the sweet spot of all of this, because you do need some accuracy when it comes to that supplier onboarding. And so how do you manage and balance all of that? The risk, the good data, the accuracy?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the investment to build something that's really focused on what you're trying to accomplish. And all these other, like whether it's email or the source to pay, the P2Ps, the zip, like all of these solutions, like this isn't their sweet spot. And so, yeah, they can give you a form and they can give you a process. But in terms of building a very, very purpose-built process that matches your definition of risk and your requirements, because by the way, Sarah, in one business, like your business versus Adobe versus Boeing versus, name the businesses, risk means something completely different to them.
Different, yeah.
And their tolerance and where they would draw those lines. So it's not like you can cookie cutter this thing out. You have to match it up with the needs of the organization and with an understanding of the type of supplier that it is. So if the data is bad and Sarah pops up to go through onboarding and the data tells me that Sarah actually is high risk because somebody's put in bad data because the systems, maybe Sarah didn't understand it. You
right.
see that form and you're like, I don't know, I'm just going to say yes. And then all of a sudden it sends you down this path of craziness, right?
I have done that before. I shouldn't be admitting this here live, but I have definitely done that before. You've just triggered something for me, Conrad. Thank you for that.
It happens to everybody, right? Because these, by the way, we could have a whole nother hour talking about like RFPs and how often you get a question, like you get this set of questions and you read it and it just makes no sense to you because frankly, the person that created that questionnaire or that process just cut and pasted it. Like they didn't invest the time and the effort to make it really understandable and really meaningful. Imagine trying to do this, by the way, if the person that wrote the question wrote it in English and you're in the Philippines or you're in Japan or China or France or Brazil, and you're trying to understand that even through the language challenges. Like it can be very complicated through the process. So it has to be really well designed and it has to be designed with the user, because that bad answer could come from the supplier or it could come from your internal team when you ask them, hey, are they going to have access to this kind of data? I don't know. I'm just going to say yes. And again, send you down a really unhappy path that doesn't apply. So I would say it's really key to design that process to make it work. Now you had 3 parts to your question and I apologize. I've lost part number 2 and part number 3.
It's okay. We kind of already answered risk. And then you talked about the data, right? And how accurate that needs to be. And I think that was, I think we got through that.
But let me highlight though, the data is really critical to the process at hand, but it also becomes the feeder for a lot of your other procurement processes.
And that was the other part of the question, is the accuracy behind that, right? Yeah. If you don't have the good data, you're saying that obviously it's going to send you down different paths, which is not good. But then also the accuracy and how you onboard that supplier and how fast it takes to onboard that supplier. If you don't have the right data, you're going to hit bottlenecks all over the place.
Yeah. So kind of step number 1 of that supplier relationship, kind of the holistic supplier management, like that is have good data to make that process work. But this data becomes the foundation. So think about a pyramid, almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The bottom of this pyramid, and you may argue that it's on level number 2 instead of level number 1. My argument is data is the foundation. Like it truly is the foundation. And you're getting this data in through various places. But one of the most important is through this onboarding process and the supplier data process. On top of that, you're building spend analytics. You're feeding a contract process. You're like, all of your procurement processes are kind of tied together through this data. So it's critical to your supplier onboarding process. But if you're trying to do a transformation, you're trying to implement a new P2P or an ERP, you need to start here. Like, don't go, oh, I'll clean up the data later, or I'll fix onboarding later. Like, this is the foundation. And if you imagine remodeling your house after it's built, like remodel the foundation after your house is built. Like, that's just silly. Like, start with a really strong foundation, and that's the data. Absolutely critical.
I want to let everybody.
I just got to say one more thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, AI, like think about AI, like what feeds AI? It's the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this idea that people in procurement have that AI is going to clean up my data. A little bit. A little bit.
It's got to be right first.
Well, yeah, I mean, and remember, because your AI is going into your data and it's going to try and do stuff. And if you have mediocre data, or by the way, the rest of the data in the internet is just mediocre average, which was what's feeding AI. It's a little bit like taking, you know, that dirty rag by your kitchen sink with all the bacteria, and you're going to go clean your house with all of this stuff, which is what's happening with your bad data, right? If you don't have good data and you think AI is going to clean it, it's not. Maybe it takes you from 60% accurate to 70% accurate, but you're not going to get to the 85, 90, 95, 100% accuracy with AI. You've really got to cultivate your data. Gartner says, I think it's like 80% of all organizations are not going to be able to take advantage of AI in procurement because they don't have good data. You've got to start here.
I love your stories and analogies. I encourage everybody to reach out to Conrad regardless after this and ask more about his analogies and his stories. I love those. I want to let everybody know that we are coming to the time where we do want to have some audience questions. So if you have any questions for Conrad, please put them in the comments on LinkedIn and YouTube so we can get to those. All right, I want to bring graphite into this. Now, you talked a lot about how graphite is similar to LinkedIn. And so talk to us about, and if you've got a story, like an example that you can share that'll showcase the challenge that a client had versus the benefits that you brought with Graphite Connect and the ROI that came from that, I'd love for you to share that story. But I also want to know how much time Graphite customers have reduced with their onboarding time by using and working with you. So talk to me a bit about both. If you have a story, I'd love for you to throw that in there.
Yeah. So one of my favorite companies is actually just around the corner from us here in Utah. It's Health Equity. Many of you will have the Health Equity HSA card in your wallet. Like they're the ones that help you, pay your medical expenses with the credit card. I think 1 in 7 Americans all have this card in their wallet. They're a really cool company. But as you can appreciate, they have financial data and they have health data, so they're highly regulated.
Right.
And when we met them, their supplier onboarding process was 90 days.
Wow. I think 90 days. That is a very long time because I just went through one of those.
Yeah, it's 90 days. And by the way, put yourself back in the inside the F1 car as the business owner trying to win. And it's sort of like this. Well, I think I'm going to need a new supplier. Like there is this critical step in my process for my project. I need to wait for procurement for 90 days before that supplier or those suppliers come in to help me.
Or even a factory line being down and you need to find a new supplier because for some reason you can't buy that particular part or raw material from the original supplier that you went to, and you have to onboard a new one to be able to keep those lines working. I mean, that could be millions of dollars on a daily basis.
So if you ask me, Sarah, like what is the right speed for onboarding? Mm-hmm. I would say, what is the speed of business that you're supporting?
Or what does success look like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's trust. Like I've seen all these graphs where like the introduction of, I don't know, the washing machine kind of went like this, and the introduction of the cell phone went like this, and the introduction of AI is like a straight up line. Like business adoption and business as a whole is accelerating like crazy. And everything we've just talked about is procurement is slowing down.
Right.
So we've got to change that. So we have the white paper on our website, so I'm comfortable kind of, sharing their name and the experience, but they were at 90 days. We went live with them and got them down to 28 days at implementation. And then we've optimized their process and we have them at like 7 days now.
Wow.
So
you cut that down.
That's a total game changer, right? For them, for all of them, and a huge boost in the credibility of the procurement team.
Yeah, well, you cut it down even on implementation of your particular platform. You cut that down by 1/3. I mean, that without anything else is huge. Yeah,
there's tons of things that, I mean, if you look at the problem, like again, back in the room with a whiteboard, you and I are trying to figure this out. This is just common sense. You go through a Six Sigma process, you identify what's taking the most time, what do you need to fix, and you design your solution to address those problems. Which sounds like common sense, like everybody should do that. But again, this is an afterthought for these other platforms. And for us, it's what we live for. So, we have technology that can help you avoid, like most organizations, because of the supplier bank fraud that's out there, they're calling the suppliers every time they give them I'm sure you've got these phone calls, Sarah.
Yes, I have.
Hey, yes, Sarah, you sent me an email that said this was your bank account. I just need to talk to you and ask you if this really is your bank account. Like those kinds of processes are adding days and days to the process because, oh, Sarah's not available. I called, she was on a meeting. I'm calling back. You're exchanging. Like we just automate all that.
And how do you even know you've got the right person?
100%. Like especially these are really tricky problems. Like in our world, we just said, hey, look, we need to verify that the person is who they say they are. If we can do that, we can automate a whole lot of this stuff, get rid of the phone calls. But that's just one example, right? So if you go Pareto those things through, then that's how you make those breakthroughs. You have to really do this with intelligent process design and user experience in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also there's got to be some verifications. I mean, we can do verification check marks on social media like Facebook and Instagram. Why don't we have the verifications for us as a business owner and as a business for some of our information that we do have to share? I mean, there is no getting around it. It has to be shared to be able to be a supplier, to be able to be onboarded. And there's got to be an easier way to do that. So can you walk us through how somebody can work with Graphite and what does that look like? As far as implementation, and then how, paint us a picture of how it works with them using your system. What does that look like? So they've got a new supplier that they need to onboard and they're already on the Graphite system. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, you mean after it's implemented, like somebody at Health Equity needs to work with a supplier that's already inside of Graphite. They go into Graphite, we've all gone into LinkedIn and search for somebody, right? This is essentially the same kind of experience. You go into the search bar and you search for, let's talk supply chain. And all of a sudden that profile for Let's Talk Supply Chain pops up and it's like, yep, that's who I want to do business with. They click that and guess what, Sarah, your name is in there. It's been verified against the IRS that this is the proper name. This is the proper tax ID. This is the proper address. We verified your bank data that because we know you are who you say you are, you put your data, we've got all that stuff and it's there. So it's as simple as, click. And then Sarah's like, yeah, I am actually wanting to do business with Health Equity or whoever. And you click. So it's like, click. And then the data's there. And the person at Health Equity that's responsible for supplier data does a scan. And they're saying, yep, this looks good. Put it in our ERP, click. And it goes into the ERP and transactions and payments can flow against it. It's like, click, done. Right? Does
it make that noise when you actually click on it? Because I would like to suggest that feature option.
Put the confetti, let the confetti flow and everything.
Confetti, thumbs up, hearts, that kind of thing. But
I'll
also
talk to the product team. That's a great idea.
But I'm going back to the banking thing because as a supplier, if my banking information changes or the company name changes or things like that, how easy is it for me to update that?
So it's easy. And remember now you're connected to 100 different organizations. They all have access to your bank data. When you go in to change it, we just verify through, depending on the situation, a number of different proprietary techniques that you are the approved person to make those changes. And then that it goes into the field. And just like, on LinkedIn was like, hey, it's Sarah's birthday and everybody on the planet finds out about it. It's the same thing. Your 100 customers all get a notification. Hey, Sarah updated her bank data. And they can come in and look at it and they can see in our trust center, actually, Sarah as the user was verified that she is who she says she is when she made this change. This is an approved change. Again, click and up it goes into the ERP and your new data is there. So yeah, that's
cool. And I really like that, especially for small to mid-sized businesses where that is a really important feature to be able to do that. And then it's updated across the board. And so this is why I said at the beginning that you have been on my to-do list for a while and I need to get my butt in gear because I've got to be on Graphite Connect. I mean, let alone anybody else in the audience. So I just want to let you know, we've only got a couple minutes left. And so if you've got any questions, make sure to put in the comments because we definitely want to get to those questions. So talk to me about the shared supplier network. We just talked about how like what it could look like when I have an update as a supplier. But I think, there's a few other tools that you have within the platform that really make a big deal for your customers. Can you talk to us about some of those features that your customers are really enjoying and what it does for them and what it does for their businesses?
So we talked a lot about like the commercial data management, the verification and validation and feeding the ERP. I think about this like the core, that then there's wrappers around it, right? So some organizations just do commercial data. As they get more mature and they're more focused on risk, they're collecting information about, child labor or modern slavery or privacy and cyber and all these things, right? So you add on top of that commercial data other things that matter to your customers or in that industry.
Well, it's a good point. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt there, but because part of the conversations that I had around that was supplier fatigue, right? Because the supplier is working with all of these different clients, and all of these different clients are coming back to them with all the questions around forced labor, anti-slavery, modern slavery. What is it that you pay people? How do you treat time off? All of these questions, they're having to answer it over and over and over again. And what happens is you get supplier fatigue when that happens. So this really helps to solve for that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so keep going.
No, I mean, the reality is, if you think about you as a business, big or small, in the traditional world, you take bits and pieces of your data and you give it to all these customers. Your data is sitting in all these places all over the world in all these businesses. And then, like you said, I need to change the bank account. You're like, well, gosh, who has my bank account? It's sitting in those 100 databases, and you've got to go figure all that out and get whoever's responsible to do those keystrokes to go in and make those changes. And because the master data management is all centralized at, inside that corporation versus, Graphite empowers you as the owner of the data to manage the master data. And then that master data flows out to all of the partners that you have on the buy side, on the sales side. So they have that information. It's just like it works this way with commercial data. It needs to work the same way with all these risk things that you're talking about, because you do it when you meet them. And guess what? In 12 months, they're going to call you back and say, hey, I need you to answer this questionnaire again because we have to refresh this risk thing. So this is so different than procurement 15 years ago. Yeah. We didn't do all of this stuff on the indirect side. And now it's, I don't know, when I left Adobe, my IT team was spending 30% of their time just white gloving this process.
Wow.
So when you think about how much opportunity cost, there is in the need to automate this around all organizations everywhere, it's huge. And frankly, I'm super excited about what we're building at Graphite. It will change, as it is the standard way, just like LinkedIn became the replacement for a resume, as Graphite becomes the replacement for all of these emails and spreadsheets. Yeah. It's a game changer for everybody. Sarah, we can set your profile up, and when these companies are like, hey, I need this information, you just click. That is what I'm doing. Click, and I want the feature to actually have the click. The click noise. Anyways, I've got a question from the audience, and I think this is a really good one, right? Because once you implement this, and you're talking about me putting up a profile and then sending it to other people, what are some roadblocks procurement professionals get from other stakeholders in adopting a platform like Graphite? Like, are there any, objections that sort of come your way that, you might need to, encounter and get through and get over? Well, you have your IT team that may have their favorite way to collect risk information, or your legal team. You have, because in today's world of everything being manual, all these cross-functional teams that are really partnering with you in this process, they've had to implement their own systems and band-aids to this as well. Right. And so, there's always the challenge of kind of creating a company-wide strategy about how this is going to work. But that's not a big deal. I mean, Graphite can integrate with any of these platforms. We don't have to be the everything for everybody tomorrow answer. I really think the key is to start simple, focus on that commercial data in the middle, and then start layering these other pieces around it. Once you get past risk, Sarah, you start getting to things like performance and other KPIs. Like these are almost the nirvana of what procurement teams want to arrive at, where they're really doing supplier management and risk mitigation instead of just running an administrative process.
Yeah. All right. I think we've got time for probably one more question. And I see one more over here. So I'm going to ask it. And I know through your case study that you gave us before, you did talk a little bit about time savings when it comes to onboarding. This is very directly around cost savings. So do you have any examples of how much cost savings you have seen from implementing a tool like Graphite?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard to talk about it, but let's just talk high level, right? You're going to have, we have I think this is a white paper as well, so I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but we have a convenience store in the Midwest that had 4 people doing the supplier data management. And they now do it with 15 hours a week of, maybe it was 3 people, 3 or 4 people. And now they're doing it with 15 hours for 1 person. So you have the cost savings associated with resources consumed inside of your procurement team, which are easier to put your arms around. And then if you think about all these engineers and other business people that are involved in the onboarding process, I talk to companies regularly that their process is like this. If you want to onboard a supplier, it's your job to go get all of that information about the supplier and bring it back and put it in this form. So now you have an engineer, somebody else that's chasing all the data and doing all this stuff. So there's a lot of indirect costs that are just, scattered across the organization. A little harder to put your arms around that. We can estimate that as we talk to you as an organization. We can give you some real value there. And then, there's probably 20 different rows in our kind of value calculator that says, these are the things. You probably have software and other tools. We're going to mitigate fraud. So many organizations are paying bad supplier, wrong supplier bank accounts because of the fraud that's out there. There's this whole stack of value in there. So it's a little different based on each company, but we can kind of come in and personalize like a value analysis or, an overall supplier onboarding maturity analysis to help your team.
Well, and I think you also said it with the 30% IT resources that it takes to run a process like this outside of utilizing Graphite. And that's a big deal, because if we think about the implementation of technology and we think about the different teams and organizations within an organization that wants to implement technology and they're not able to roll it out because of the IT resources or the limited IT resources that they have. So if you're able to even eliminate that by, I think you said, well, I don't know how much you're eliminating it by, but you said 30% of IT teams are spending time on this particular thing. That's a big deal, because that means that everybody else in the organization can get up and running faster on the different technology that they want to implement as well.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. I would say, I talked about credibility and reputation of your team. Think about how hard we've tried to have a seat at the table in procurement supply chain. And when they just think that you're crazy and you don't know how to run business, they're not bringing deals to you early. They're not really collaborating with you for value. They're not inviting you to help win. They're just tolerating you. And so there's this huge follow-on effect of value that comes to the table once you implement a process and everyone goes, wow, like that's a game changer.
Absolutely. Well, that is a good place to end. I was going to ask you what's your one main takeaway, but I think that kind of wraps it all up into a bow for us. Conrad, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, I'm having more and more conversations about procurement, but overall, it's true that most teams just don't realize how much time and value they're losing in the first mile and everything that's being impacted, right? Sourcing, payments, innovation, speed to value. And in an environment where time and budgets are being squeezed, like left, right, and center, speeding up that onboarding cycle is such an easy win, as you've shared, and can lead to some really big results. So if you want to find out how you can cut supplier onboarding cycle times to days instead of months and give your procurement team the speed advantage, check out graphiteconnect.com. And a big thank you to all of you for listening, watching, commenting. Keep an eye on Let's Talk Supply Chain for more events coming up. Conrad, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. It was really great to be with you again.
We'll see everyone soon. Bye.